Sunlight spilled across the marble countertops of the Reynolds kitchen, illuminating dust particles that Grace Miller observed with practiced attention. Her weathered hands, mapped with 6 decades of life's geography, moved methodically across the surface. 3 weeks into this job, and she'd already memorized the rhythms of this house, its breath, its silences, the particular way tension hung in corners where light couldn't reach. The Millbrook neighborhood boasted tree-lined streets and homes with architectural features highlighted in real estate magazines. The Reynolds residence stood among them. Impeccable landscaping, tasteful decor, family photos arranged with artful precision. A masterclass in appearances. Grace recognized the familiar dissonance. 23 houses over 15 years had taught her that the most polished facades often concealed the deepest fractures. Stephen Reynolds, always in motion, phone perpetually angled toward his face, left traces of his presence in abandoned coffee cups and crumpled sticky notes. His wife Rachel moved like a ghost through the rooms, leaving plates untouched, books open to the same page for days. And Emily, their 16-year-old daughter, had perfected the art of invisibility, existing primarily through bedroom door slams and the lingering scent of drugstore perfume. That Tuesday afternoon, Grace was folding laundry when she heard it, a muffled sob from behind Emily's door. Not the theatrical kind teenagers sometimes deployed, but the raw, ragged sound of genuine despair. She paused, washcloth suspended between her fingers. The house rule was clear: clean, don't connect. Mrs. Reynolds had emphasized this during orientation, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. We value our privacy. Grace returned to her folding, methodical and precise. But the crying continued, punctuated by what sounded like a fist against a pillow. Before wisdom could override instinct, Grace reached into her apron pocket for her small notepad, the one where she typically recorded cleaning supplies to replenish. She wrote 5 words, tore the page carefully, and approached Emily's door. She knelt slowly, her knees protesting with a familiar ache, and slipped the folded paper beneath the door. The crying stopped abruptly. Grace returned to the laundry room, resuming her work with the same measured pace. She didn't hear the door crack open minutes later, didn't see Emily's tear-stained face as she read the note, didn't witness the girl's fingers tracing over the words written in neat, steady handwriting, "You are not alone," 3 words that would unknowingly shift the foundation of 4 intersecting lives. Emily's response appeared 3 days later, a folded sheet of notebook paper tucked beneath the hallway runner where Grace stored her cleaning supplies. The handwriting was uncertain, pressed deeply into the page, as if each word had required physical effort. "Nobody sees me." "Not really." "How did you?" Grace read it twice, her heart contracting with a familiar ache. She slipped the note into her apron pocket, carrying its weight throughout the day as she moved through the motions of dusting bookshelves and polishing the untouched dining table. That evening, after the Reynolds household had settled into its customary silence, she composed her reply with deliberate care. "Some people speak loudest when they say nothing at all. I've been listening for a long time." Thus began their silent correspondence, fragments of truth exchanged like precious artifacts. Emily wrote of college application pressure, of panic attacks in school bathrooms, of the deafening silence that had engulfed her home after her mother's 3rd miscarriage. Grace responded with gentle wisdom, never advice, merely acknowledgement, a witnessing. The changes manifested subtly. Emily's backpack began appearing by the door each morning. Rachel's teacup, previously abandoned after a perfunctory sip, now returned to the sink empty. The air in the house shifted imperceptibly, like the first suggestion of season change. Grace expanded her quiet intervention. She began leaving small offerings, a sprig of lavender beneath Rachel's pillow, dog-eared library books about grief on the nightstand, homemade bread cooling on the counter, anonymous kindnesses that required no acknowledgement. One Wednesday, Grace noticed Rachel standing at the kitchen window, actually seeing the garden she'd once meticulously tended. Her fingers traced a note Grace had left. "The earth waits patiently for you. with the same reverence one might touch a sacred text. The most treacherous moment came on a rain-soaked afternoon. Grace was sliding a note. "Your essay was beautiful. Your words matter," into Emily's chemistry textbook when a shadow fell across the page. Stephen Reynolds stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous, rainwater still clinging to his coat. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Grace straightened slowly, her dignity intact despite the tremor in her hands. "My job, Mr. Reynolds, is to care for your home. Sometimes that extends beyond the visible surfaces. By manipulating my daughter, by overstepping every professional boundary." His voice escalated, years of suppressed emotion finding an outlet. "You're fired. Pack your things." The commotion drew Emily from her room. She stood at the top of the stairs, clutching a shoebox filled with Grace's notes as if it contained treasure. "She's the only one who ever asked if I was okay," Emily said, her voice small but steady. "The only one who made me feel like maybe I should stick around to find out what happens next." The silence that followed contained everything the Reynolds family had left unspoken for years. Rachel Reynolds stood motionless in the hallway shadow, her presence unnoticed in the charged atmosphere between her husband and daughter. She observed the tableau with the detached clarity that sometimes accompanies profound emotional upheaval, the way Emily's fingers clutched the shoebox, the rigid line of Stephen's shoulders, the quiet dignity in Grace's posture despite her evident distress. "I received notes too," Rachel said, her voice rusty from disuse. The three figures turned toward her, startled by this unexpected intervention. She stepped forward, reaching into her cardigan pocket to withdraw several folded papers. "For weeks, I thought they were from you, Stephen. I wanted them to be." Stephen's expression shifted from anger to confusion. His rain-dampened hair fell across his forehead, making him appear younger, more vulnerable. "You've been communicating with my wife as well." Grace met his gaze directly. "I've been witnessing your family's pain, Mr. Reynolds. There's a difference." The kitchen filled with a particular quality of silence, not the hollow absence that had defined the household for months, but something pregnant with potential. Outside, rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, creating a cocoon around this moment of fracture and possibility. "I'm sorry for overstepping," Grace continued, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "I'll gather my things." That night, after Grace had departed with quiet efficiency, the Reynolds family sat at their dining table for the first time in months. Conversation emerged in awkward fragments, years of unspoken thoughts struggling to find form. Stephen confessed his paralyzing fear of saying the wrong thing, of causing more pain. Emily revealed the suffocating pressure of trying to be perfect while her family disintegrated. Rachel spoke of feeling hollowed out, invisible in her own grief. Morning arrived with tentative sunlight and the conspicuous absence of Grace's reassuring presence. The house felt uncomfortably honest, stripped of pretense. They moved through their routines with new awareness, like actors who had suddenly realized they were performing. 3 days later, the mail carrier delivered a cream-colored envelope addressed simply to the Reynolds family. Inside was a letter written in the now familiar, careful handwriting. "When my daughter Rebecca took her life 15 years ago, she left a note saying she felt unseen. I failed to recognize her silence for what it was, a desperate form of communication. In the aftermath, I discovered purpose in tending to homes, not because I needed employment, but because I needed to remain connected to life itself, to notice what often goes unnoticed. Your family reminded me of my own, the silent pain, the disconnection disguised as routine. I recognize I had no right to intervene, but sometimes we are called to actions beyond conventional boundaries. Families rarely fracture suddenly. The process happens in accumulated silences, in questions unasked, in truths unexpressed. And healing begins not with grand gestures, but with simple recognition, seeing one another completely, even the broken parts, especially those. You have everything you need to rebuild. It was always there, waiting beneath the silence. With deepest respect, Grace Miller. The letter lay open on the kitchen counter throughout the day, each family member returning to read it again, finding different meanings in its careful sentences. None spoke of it directly, yet its presence altered the atmospheric pressure of their home, making space for something new to emerge from what had been broken. The therapeutic office, where Stephen Reynolds now sat each Thursday afternoon, bore little resemblance to the corporate spaces he had navigated with such practiced confidence. Here, the lighting was deliberately soft, the furnishings chosen for comfort rather than impression. He found himself increasingly at ease in this environment of intentional vulnerability. "I spent 20 years building wealth management strategies," he explained to Dr. Winters, "calibrating risk tolerance for clients who trusted me with their futures. Yet I couldn't recognize the depreciation happening within my own home." Outside, October painted the Boston Commons in amber and crimson. Stephen watched a father teaching his young daughter to ride a bicycle, the man's hands hovering protectively near her shoulders, ready to catch, but allowing her the dignity of possible failure. Something about the scene caused his voice to thicken. "I've been calculating what Grace's intervention was worth to my family. It's mathematically impossible." Across town, Rachel stood before 12 women gathered in the community room she had rented with nervous determination. The space felt too large for their small circle, emphasizing the tentative nature of this beginning. She adjusted her cardigan, a gesture familiar to her body, though the purpose was new, no longer hiding, now preparing. "Grief doesn't arrive with instructions," she began, her voice steadier than she had anticipated. "We're not given a manual for how to continue breathing when every inhalation feels like an act of betrayal to what we've lost." The women watched her with the particular attention of those who recognize their own experience in another's words. Rachel felt their gaze like a physical presence, not the scrutiny she had feared, but something akin to recognition. "I started this group because an ordinary woman doing an ordinary job saw me when I had become invisible to myself. She reminded me that witnessing another's pain without attempting to fix it is perhaps the most profound act of respect." At Westridge High School, Emily's essay, "The Woman Who Saw Me," had transformed from a classroom assignment to a viral phenomenon after her English teacher, with Emily's permission, submitted it to a national competition focused on everyday heroes. Requests for interviews accumulated in her inbox, but Emily declined them all with polite firmness. Some stories, she believed, diminished in the retelling. Instead, she channeled her unexpected platform into establishing a peer support network. In the school's East Corridor, during Tuesday lunches, students gathered to practice the simple art of acknowledgement, learning to hear what remained unspoken, to recognize distress disguised as disinterest. 3 seasons had cycled through the Millbrook neighborhood when the Reynolds family finally located Grace Miller. Her apartment in Cambridge revealed a life of modest comfort and careful dignity. Bookshelves lined with poetry collections, African violets thriving on the windowsill, walls adorned with framed photographs of landscapes rather than people. Grace opened her door to find 3 familiar figures standing in the hallway. For a moment, no one spoke. The space between them hummed with all that had transpired in the intervening months. Rachel extended a small potted herb garden, thyme and rosemary nestled among mint leaves. "You planted seeds," she said simply. That evening, they sat in Grace's small living room, the conversation flowing with the natural rhythm that emerges between people who have witnessed one another's essential truths. As twilight softened the edges of the day, Emily presented Grace with a leather-bound journal. "For your notes," she explained, "there are other families who need to be seen." Grace ran her fingers over the cover, recognizing in this gesture not gratitude but partnership, an acknowledgement that healing often requires moving beyond one's own restoration to become a vessel for others, the circle completing itself. "Sometimes," Grace said, "the most profound change begins with the smallest recognition, that moment when someone truly sees us." She looked at each of them in turn, and sometimes, in the act of seeing others, we find ourselves again. The apartment filled with a quality of silence, entirely unlike the hollow absence that had first drawn Grace's attention months ago. This silence held fullness, the sacred pause that exists between people who have nothing left to hide and everything still to discover.